As Matt said, this is the third talk in the sessions that we've had focused on coastal inundation. And very pleased here today to have Dr. Ian Kraucunas, if I've pronounced that correctly.
Very nice.
At PNNL. He is the Chief Science and Technology Officer there and leading several multi-institutional projects at the Department of Energy and in the Office of Biological Environmental Research. He's currently, and this is what we'll hear more about today, the principal investigator for the Integrated Coastal Modeling System, Icom. That was launched recently, a couple years ago, 2019, and it focuses on developing and applying integrated modeling platforms, right, to simulate human and natural systems in the coastal regions. Initial focus is in the Mid-Atlantic, and Ian has also been involved in projects, not just in the Mid-Atlantic, but other parts of the country and the world, I believe, and specifically Great Lakes and Puget Sound regions. So we are definitely very excited to hear about Ian's perspective, his extensive experience and knowledge about all parts of the country, which is great to hear. But in particular, we'll hear more about Icom, this very large and exciting and an impressive project at DOE. And I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the introduction and of course for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to sharing some more information about Icom and then hopefully a nice discussion of various opportunities for collaboration, learning more about what you all are doing in your various venues, and see whether there might be some intersections that we could explore. I was saying before the call started that this community engagement effort is something that we we're just getting started on when COVID hit. And so that really put a monkey wrench in, I think, some of our plans to really get out there. And so this is a great opportunity to re-jumpstart that effort, and I'm really looking forward to it. So appreciate the invitation. Let me get my screen back up here. All right, we tested this in advance. Hopefully you can see everything here.
Looks good from here.
All right, let me go into presentation mode. And if anybody has a burning question, you'll need to speak up because when I'm in full screen mode, I can't see any hands or anything like that. This is an overview of the Icom project. I tried to keep it at a pretty high level with details here and there as opposed to something comprehensive, just to kind of give you a flavor of all the different facets of this really multi-pronged effort. And I'll start by saying this is a very broad and diverse team. We have 14 institutional partners, including 4 Department of Energy laboratories and 10 universities. So it's a really great mix of people. And I also want to start by saying, as John alluded to, that Icom is funded by multiple program areas in the Earth and Environmental System Science Division of the Department of Energy's Office of Science. And once the recording stops, you can ask me whether it's harder to wrangle 14 different institutional partners or 4 different programs in DOE, because I'm not going to answer that question on camera. But the other thing I wanted to make a point on here, for those who aren't as familiar with how the Department of Energy Office of Science works, it's a very large sort of funding organization, and it funds university partners, or funds university projects. It also funds 14 different national laboratories. I think the Office of Science is responsible for 4 or 5 of those. And they tend to, the projects that they fund at the national laboratories tend to be large projects that are intended to be multi-years, often decadal plus scale efforts that really allow for sustained effort and capacity building in a specific area. And so the origin of the Icom project was in 2019. PNNL was invited to sort of lead a team to submit a proposal to get DOE started in this space. We've done bits and pieces of work in the coastal environment, various coastal regions, and other parts of DOE do work in various coastal areas as well, that I'd be happy to talk more about at a different time. But this was an effort that was sort of presented to us and an opportunity for the Office of Science to really make a big investment and really jumpstart some activities here that would leverage a bunch of other things going on. So I'll explain more as we go along, but I wanted to provide that as some initial context. So I think I'll go briefly through this side. Why do we need integrated coastal modeling? Because I suspect most of you have a good appreciation for this. Well, one is, of course, there's a lot of human infrastructure and development and people living in the coast, and that number's only going up over time. The image at the bottom there is of Ocean City, Maryland. The amount of damage occurring due to flooding is going up as well, in part because there's more people and stuff in harm's way, and also because the intensity of precipitation events, hurricanes, et cetera, has been going up. And I think there's a lot of effort going on across a number of different agencies to disentangle some of those trends. The image on the bottom here, also in our study region, is in Ellicott City, Maryland, which was struck by two, I think, 100-year or 500-year floods 1 year apart from each other. So a good example of how those extreme events and impacts are changing over time. And finally, there's a number of different hazards, not just flooding, right? This is a image of some hypoxia nowcast from a few years ago from our partners at VIMS, and also an image of some fish kill. I believe that one's actually on Delaware Bay, sort of showing that this isn't just about too much water. Sometimes it's about too little water or about water quality. There's a whole host of different coastal impacts that we need to account for. And in many cases, these impacts represent the convolution of different factors, including human development patterns and land use changes, in addition to how the climate Earth system might be changing. So understanding how the coastal environment and the risks associated with changes in the coastal environment are evolving over time requires us to consider a lot of different factors at once. And so this is really our motivation for taking an integrated modeling approach that attempts to connect those pieces across different sectoral domains. So this slide is an illustration of some of the key drivers and processes that we are really interested in the Icom project. And those range from things like large-scale extreme drivers of extreme events, so things like tropical cyclones, extratropical cyclones, droughts, et cetera. We're interested in surface-atmosphere interactions. That includes over the land surface and the processes occurring there, as well as ocean atmospheric interactions and how those are driving changes in tropical cyclone intensity, frequency, et cetera. We're quite interested in the human and natural system interactions, including coastal development, urbanization, and other land use and land cover changes, and how those drive changes in vulnerability, as well as changes in things like sediment and nutrient transport out into estuaries and ultimately the ocean. And one other important note here is DOE has a lot of capabilities, and so the project here tries to leverage a lot of the different capabilities ranging from Earth system modeling to fine scale modeling, et cetera. One of those areas is in watershed scale hydrology, and so things like surface water, groundwater interactions are a natural thing to think about in the context of a DOE funded project. And so we're interested in key processes, modulo the areas where DOE has, we think, sort of distinguishing capabilities that we can bring to bear on the different questions. The long-term vision of the Icom project is to really deliver a robust and predictive understanding of coastal evolution that accounts for all these complex processes going on across different scales and across different systems. And we recognize that this is not something that's going to be accomplished in a couple of years. We view this really as a decadal scale goal and even beyond. There's always going to be a need, I think, for improved understanding of how these things are evolving over time. So we've developed a few science questions. I'm not going to read all of these in detail, but I'll sort of give you at a high level, what are the things that we're most interested in that we think are sort of unique to Icom, or at least make Icom sort of our distinguishing characteristics as a project. One is this interaction. So that includes combination of both human Earth system interactions, as well as representing that continuum from the land surface to rivers to estuaries and out to the ocean, and trying to have modeling components that talk seamlessly across those different components. As I mentioned on the last slide, we're interested in surface atmospheric interactions, both over land and over the ocean as well. And all these things influence coastal hazards in different ways. Another thing that is an important distinguishing factor of, I think, a number of DOE projects is we are interested in long-term changes, multi-decadal scale changes that are driven by human activities, including greenhouse gas emissions, land use and land cover change, et cetera, changing development patterns. But we're also interested in tipping points and shocks and extreme events. And so to be able to resolve extreme events and represent long-term changes, you really need a range of different tools, because the tools that you can do very high resolution modeling required to understand some tipping points aren't models that you can necessarily run for multi-decadal timescales. And so having a blend of different tools that we can leverage to answer different questions is important. So in the introduction, you heard more about our study region. So this is a map kind of illustrating the different elements of that that's sort of the upper mid-Atlantic study region. And this region is, of course, exposed to a number of different stresses and extremes, including sort of influence of the tropics, influence of extratropics. There's strong urban to rural gradients, as well as upland to estuary gradients in this region. We also see important opportunities to compare and contrast systems. For example, we have a strong focus on both the Delaware and Susquehanna River basins, which have a number of things in common with each other in terms of the types of extremes that they're exposed to, the types of development patterns that occur there. But they're also very different, in the Delaware being free-flowing all the way to its bay, whereas the Susquehanna has the largest hydroelectric dam, I think privately operated hydroelectric dam in the country, near its mouth. And so I think that sort of difference is important to look at and gives us some unique insights that we can leverage. We also have a focus on two urban areas, Baltimore and Philadelphia, where we're developing some high resolution models of land use and land cover change and urbanization patterns. And again, those are different but somewhat similar cities that we're looking at, and we can compare and contrast. And of course, we're trying to leverage not just DOE capabilities, but the data and capabilities that other agencies bring to the table in this entire region. And hopefully you'll see that emerge a little bit in this presentation, but rest assured that there's more behind the scenes. And I think this presentation is also a great opportunity to learn more about, well, what else is out there that we should know about, so that we can learn more about the data sources that we could use for model calibration, validation, et cetera, as well as what opportunities might exist for us to do some partnering in terms of model intercomparison or exchanging of ideas. One final note is a lot of DOE funded research is, even when it's sort of more focused on a specific region like this project, we're trying to develop capabilities that are extensible, that where we can take some of these modeling constructs and apply them to other diverse geographic contexts. So that's very much part of our thinking as we're planning and executing the Icom project. So this slide, I'm not going to go through all of the details on it, but I want to sort of give the programmatic context for Icom. So the four boxes down at the bottom of this screen are the four programs within DOE's Biological and Environmental Research program that fund Icom. So there's one that's focused on regional and global modeling, one that's focused on multi-sector dynamics, interactions between different human and natural systems, one focused on the development of DOE's Earth System model, E3SM. I'll talk more about that later. And the Earth System Science program that includes sort of some subsurface, surface, and watershed scale interactions. In addition, we have some cross-cutting topics. And so there's sort of a cross-cutting research area that leverages capabilities from all four of the component program areas and provides insights to all four of those program areas, but where the topics being studied don't belong naturally in any one of them. So this is an exciting sort of add-on to the project, I think, and something that's unique within the construct of at least the DOE family of integrated projects. So we're very excited about that. Oops, went the wrong way. Okay, so basically the next few slides, I've got 2 slides on each program area just to give you a flavor of these different bits and pieces of this diverse project. So the first of these, regional global modeling and analysis, Ruby Lung from PNNL is the PI of this particular part of the project, and it really focuses on understanding large-scale patterns and surface-atmosphere interactions and how those things interact and drive mid-Atlantic extreme events. And so there's a number of modeling tools that are developed, including the E3SM model that I mentioned earlier, but also higher resolution models like WRF and the UNCM model out of the University of Washington. There's some emphasis on metrics development, particularly for land surface projects, and the ILAM activity is one example of that, and well as leveraging some land surface models and how those models interact with the atmosphere above. So we tend to focus on, we've picked out some extreme events that are high impact in this particular region. That, of course, includes extratropical storms and hurricanes, but it also includes warm season convective storms. We do a lot of compare and contrast between the different types of systems that drive extreme precipitation events. And droughts are also an emphasis of this project, working in collaboration with other DOE efforts. To give one example of a recent paper emerging out of the RGMA program area, this is one of the project teams, and they did an analysis of different precipitation types and tried to classify that into 4 different bins. So there's precipitation arising from mesoscale convective systems, precipitation arising from isolated deep convection, from tropical cyclones, and then from other forms or non-convective precipitation. and they looked at how these different components of rainfall contribute to the overall mean as well as to extreme events in rainfall. The image shown here shows daily max rainfall on the left and hourly max rainfall on the right, and the circle sort of highlights the study region, that mid-Atlantic, the center of the mid-Atlantic region. And if you look across the different elements here, yes, tropical cyclones matter, especially for daily rainfall extremes, but really it's interesting to note that the mesoscale convective systems really drive a lot of the most extreme rainfall events in this system. So that's interesting. It's not just isolated deep convection, but these organized systems. Also, the team looked at where did these systems come from. We have an algorithm that tracks where systems come from and you can backtrack sort of where they arose from to figure out where the mesoscale convective system might have originated. And actually over 50% of these mesoscale convective systems driving extreme rainfall originated in the Great Plains and Midwest and propagated into the study region. So we thought that was a pretty interesting insight when we're thinking about the most extreme events in this region. So moving on to the second major program area, that's the multi-sector dynamics program area. That's led by Dave Judy, also at PNNL. And this element really is about the human system and its interaction with natural systems. And we're interested in how different time-evolving stressors are impacting these systems. And that includes coastal development patterns, infrastructure, evolution, as well as natural hazards, and how these things conspire with each other to produce sort of coastal risk, as well as how humans are adapting that risk in terms of adaptation strategies. So one interesting component that we're developing here is, and I alluded to this earlier, is a new agent-based coastal development model that is trying to do multi-decadal simulation of how development patterns might evolve we're starting with Baltimore and Philadelphia as our case study areas, and trying to understand where humans might be responding to flood risk, what kinds of agents most sensitive to flood risk, and how might that change over time as you have sea level rise and extreme events strike. So that's a really interesting and unique new capability. We also have DOE has a number of labs that do critical infrastructure modeling of various sorts, including electric power, as well as the energy system, of course, being an emphasis, but also other types of infrastructure. And so we're using some of those tools to really look at the electric power system in the Mid-Atlantic region and how it is adapting. And so we have different algorithms that we've developed to look at how adaptation proceeds currently and how it might change in the future to reduce coastal risk. And all this is done in a probabilistic natural hazard characterization framework with a focus on some of the most extreme events, including hurricanes and other drivers of flood. And we have tools to produce very large numbers of sample storms that we can use to really look at this in a very probabilistic way. So that's very exciting. Again, zeroing in on just one example of the many areas where we're doing some model development and application here. We have a new deep learning based model for tropical cyclone intensification. So this uses what's called a multi-layer perceptron approach. Don't ask me what that actually is. I read about it and I still don't understand it, but it seems really cool. But it uses a neural network architecture and it has an automatic optimization of the parameters within that architecture as well as of the architecture itself. And this was trained on multiple years of data of tropical cyclone intensification and then used to do some prediction over a couple of years. And in those 2 years, the years 2019 and 2020, it actually outperformed nearly all of the other models, the operational models that are out there to predict intensification on a 24-hour timescale. So we thought that was a pretty exciting result, and the references here if you're interested in learning more about this model. And I should mention that this model is just a component of what's called our Risk Analysis Framework for Tropical Cyclones, or RAFT, which has been developed not just by Icom, but also by other projects. And it includes, in addition to this deep learning-based model, a physics-based track model for tropical cyclones. And we're currently working to develop a precipitation model that does both the long track and outside the track based on a combination of physics and deep learning type approaches. So again, exciting area that leverages a number of unique DOE capabilities where we have very strong capabilities in the data science space. The third program area is Earth System Model Development, and this area really focuses on E3SM. That's DOE's flagship Earth System model. That stands for Energy Exascale Earth System Model. I realize I didn't put that anywhere on the slide, but that's what E3SM stands for. And our focus in this program area is in improving the representation of the interactions between the land surface, river networks, and out into the near coastal ocean, and including the interaction of humans with all of those different elements. And we're interested in things like as you can see on the slide here, river flow and management, urban hydrology and sediment fluxes, but also in how when you couple the river with the land surface and with estuaries, you can better resolve things like tides and sea level rise, sediment transport, backwater flows, and things like that. So there's been a lot of effort in developing coupling strategies for these different elements of E3SM to enable it to more seamlessly represent the flow of water. And we're really focusing on the amount of water first. And so there's been a lot of emphasis on more barotropic type development simulation. And as we move into the next phase of Icom, we're looking to really enhance more of the baroclinic response, looking at things like salinity, sediment transport, et cetera. But in terms of flooding, there's been a lot of great results so far just with this three-way coupling approach. Again, looking at one specific example, this is a tool called HEX Watershed, which is a watershed delineation model. And we've improved this to look at river networks and be able to burn those networks in. And we've shown that this approach can consistently represent them at multiple spatial resolutions. And this is an important underpinning capability because E3SM is really moving towards unstructured meshes and a unified mesh approach. And so we need tools that can represent stream networks in that environment. So this is just one example of many different sort of grid and meshing type enhancements that we've performed, because representing coastal systems, as I'm sure you know, requires us to find ways to represent very, very tight and extreme spatial gradients in the context of much larger systems, because coastal environments are influenced by things like global tides, and we have now included tides within E3SM. That's another important capability development. And you have to do that globally to really get a good understanding of how they can influence different specific events. But then you also need very high resolution in specific areas in order to better represent some of the processes occurring at the coastal scale. So it's a first order challenge, and I think this is one of the tools we've developed to take on that challenge. The final program area that's funding the projects, and so we have an area associated with it, is the Earth System Science program area, really focusing on watershed scale hydrology in this case. And this program area focuses really on one major task, which is understanding the role of antecedent conditions in driving flooding. So where you might have one relatively small storm come in, but raise the water table up, and then another storm might come in, again, maybe not the biggest storm that's hit the region, but one that's hitting with this already elevated water table, and it can give rise to much more flooding than might occur if you had a much larger storm hitting without that preconditioning of the land surface. And so we're studying this set of processes with an ultra high resolution watershed scale model. The images on the bottom here show the Philadelphia area with surface ponded water before and after a simulated Hurricane Irene, and it gives you an idea of the scale at which the model, which is called the Advanced Terrestrial Simulator, or ATS, can resolve these processes. So this is another important component of the project, again, looking at flooding events in the context of different systems and how they contribute to that flooding response. Finally, we have, and I mentioned this up front, the cross-cutting research area. So this is really looking at those different boxes that are on the image here, all the different program areas and what they're focusing on, and their contributing capabilities, but also getting information from the two major cross-cutting tasks, one of which focuses on hazard modeling and model intercomparison. And the hazards we're primarily interested in this phase of Icom are flooding and hypoxia. Those are the two things that we chose to look at initially. That includes the impacts of coastal development on a variety of different processes. And so we take, for example, the coastal development model that we're developing out of the multi-sector dynamics program area, and we use it to study, well, how are those urbanization changes affecting convective precipitation events in built-up regions in the mid-Atlantic? Or how does coastal development drive changes in sediment and nutrients that are potentially contributing to some of the hypoxia that we're seeing in both of the major bays in our region? One example of work emerging from the cross-cutting research area is actually from a different region, from Hurricane Harvey. And so again, we're taking these tools that we develop and we're looking for opportunities to apply them in other places, not just in the Mid-Atlantic. So I chose this deliberately to illustrate that. And this was a relatively high impact study by one of our collaborators, Michael Wayner out of Berkeley Lab. And so he does a lot of work in terms of climate change attribution. And the study here, he partnered with someone who develops hydraulic models, and they used a combination of the hydraulic model with precipitation estimates that were translated from attribution statements about precipitation in order to understand, well, how much of the flooding could be attributed to climate change versus simply physical processes involved in the hurricane itself. And they found that the total, generally speaking, the total volume of floodwaters that they saw in Hurricane Harvey was similar to the attributable increase in precipitation. The attributable increase in the flood area was a bit less, but that really varied from neighborhood to neighborhood. And some of the neighborhoods that had the highest flooding actually had a much higher fraction of that water could be attributable to climate change. And the details of the drainage systems really matter. And so getting it very high resolution and using a high resolution hydraulic model was important for yielding that insight. They also did kind of a rough estimation of the economic impacts of the hurricane that could be then backed out and attributed to climate change, human-caused climate change. And that best guess was around $13 billion, which was, that's a pretty large fraction of the overall damages from Hurricane Harvey, again, just attributed to the human-caused portion of the warming. So very interesting result, again, leveraging Icom capabilities, but in a different region. So that was I finished up the overview there of the sort of research overview, and I wanted to turn my attention briefly before wrapping up and turning to questions to opportunities for collaboration, because as I started by saying, we've been looking to establish partnerships. We've got, I think, some great partnerships with some other DOE-funded projects, and so those are at the top of this figure. Projects like E3SM, the Compass project, which includes activities in the Great Lakes as well as in the Mid-Atlantic region, and other projects under the DOE Office of Science umbrella. But we also want to explore additional partnerships with different agencies. We do have some of our team members, of course, who participate in activities funded by all of these or many of these entities. We have, for example, some members of our team have contributed to some work, some meetings on with the Delaware in the Delaware River region, looking at the salinity processes there, et cetera. But we think there's a lot of additional opportunities here. And so we're interested in knowing what observations are out there that could help us, given what we're trying to do, who might be interested in some of our modeling results that we could potentially collaborate with. We're trying to do as much of our work as possible in an open science kind of a context. So our data, our model runs, our code is all publicly available once it gets published. The other thing I'll note is we're trying to use things like case studies and storylines and scenarios to guide our experiments to promote integration within the project. But we think that also could be a venue for promoting integration with other projects if they choose to look at similar sorts of case studies, et cetera. So I'm eager to hear more from you all in terms of where you might see some opportunities for us. And finally, we are wrapping up phase 1 of the Icom project, which was we were formally approved in late 2019. We really started our work in 2020. And as we were funded through the end of fiscal year 2023, so about another year or so, we have been invited to submit a renewal proposal. So we're excited to get started on that. And that work will commence over the next year as we sort of develop what we want to do next. And this slide just has a few ideas that preliminary ideas that we've had in terms of how we might extend and leverage some of our existing work in various storms and extreme events, and doing that through additional long-term and high-resolution modeling simulations, better understanding of flood risks associated with coupling and where and when that compound flooding between river and sea level rise actually matters, as well as leveraging our tools to represent urban systems and urban environments and how those are changing in the context of other land use and land cover changes like agricultural changes in the region. We also see many additional stresses and system dynamics and impacts that will be important to consider, additional infrastructure systems, starting to look in more earnest at how salinity changes and saltwater intrusion are affecting the region. We'd love to get more into biogeochemistry, water quality, and even sediment transport and how that affects ecogeomorphology across different scales, as this is an important, particularly in the context of sea level rise, which I know is a big interest to this group. And finally, we do have a little bit of work, nascent work now, on disaggregating impacts of flooding across different socioeconomic groups. That's something we're building some internal capabilities at PNNL to do, but also within this project we're looking at. And this is certainly becoming of increasing importance. And I think we all think it's very important to start looking at this and better understand where the impacts are occurring and where there might be different opportunities for different responses in different communities, depending on their sort of vulnerability as well as their needs. So we're very excited to get started on some of that work in the near future. And with that, I will wrap up. I will encourage everybody, if you haven't already, take a look at our website. We are in the process of updating that. I would expect that over the next few months, we will be adding a lot more content in terms of data model and how to find that across our modeling constructs. And I welcome anybody to reach out to me or other members of the team. I'd be happy to put you in touch with so we can talk more if we run out of time during the discussion that's following this presentation. So let me stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do that and find you all. And now I am eager to hear what questions and comments you have. John, do you want to moderate or do you want me to just call on people? You are muted if you're trying to talk.
I guess in the absence of John, Hyan, why don't you go on? You have your hand raised.
You're muted now, Hyan.
That's the accident.
I think Hyan's raised hand was an accident. I do have a question there real quick. Thank you, Ian. It was really interesting talk. I was interested in, I guess I was sort of waiting for you to connect the coastal processes to ecosystems. And you did that in, I think, either your second or third initiative related to E3SM. And I'm just wondering, do they explicitly simulate like biogeochemical processes? Is there a BGC model as part of the E3CM setup? Or is it more about simulating the variables that we know are eventually important to ecosystems?
So E3SM does have a very sophisticated biogeochemistry model as part of it. And it is its own standalone major project within DOE, developing some of those biogeochemical modules, as well as other, obviously, parts of that modeling system. The Icom project is sort of focused narrowly on how do we make E3SM valuable to coastal modeling, and what things do we need to do to make it relevant to coastal modeling. And certainly ecosystems are important, and understanding ecosystem dynamics is important for understanding coastal processes. But first you have to figure out how much water there is, how much is flooding the land, et cetera, right? And so the initial phase of Icom is very much focused on that, is really focused on just the flooding sort of question and the ability to transmit water up and down from rivers to the estuary and out into the ocean in a seamless way to enable that coupling. Once we do that, then we can start asking, okay, what are the important biogeochemistry that we need to understand, and what are the ecosystem responses that we need to simulate there? There are whole projects of the same scale of Icom just developing sort of improved models of various ecosystems within E3SM. Particularly, there's one project that focuses on the Arctic, and these are called the NG projects. There's an NG Arctic project, there's an NG Tropics project, and these are really improving the ability of E3SM to represent various aspects of ecosystems and ecosystem dynamics. So we will eventually get there, but really it's the emphasis of other projects right now.
Makes sense. Thank you. Appreciate it. John, you're still on mute. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Being part of the Mid-Atlantic, being active in these areas, it was very exciting to see the graphics and the topics that you were talking about. I think you're hitting all the major points that we talk about in the Mid-Atlantic quite often. One particular one, I just wanted to ask you about saltwater intrusion. I know that's been a big topic around here for not that long, maybe 5-6 years, really been pushing it. But have you been able to integrate the actual groundwater modeling inside your coupled model with the coastal and surface water?
Not yet. So probably a similar answer to what I just gave, right? That DOE has huge efforts in watershed scale modeling, and these models are capable of simulating sort of things like saltwater intrusion, potentially. And we're looking to start building those capabilities, but we aren't there yet. E3SM, like all Earth system models, has a relatively simplified, sort of more 1D representation of subsurface processes, right? Doesn't do subsurface lateral flow yet. That is another sort of thing we'd eventually like to improve in the E3SM model. But for saltwater intrusion, we probably need even higher resolution than an Earth system model is going to be capable of. And so that model I showed, the Advanced Terrestrial Simulator, that's one of the things we actually want to start doing in this next year, is adding the ability to represent the salt front and how that could potentially influence water supplies, starting in the Philadelphia region, since we've already got the model kind of spun up there. And I've been told by regional stakeholders I've don't remember exactly who, that like the city of Philadelphia is starting to worry about this as the salt front kind of slowly marches its way up northward, that they are worried about the potential for some contamination there. But of course, there's other systems in the region that could be affected by this as well.
Absolutely. I've actually talked with the City of Philadelphia Water Department about this specific issue and working through the Delaware River Basin Commission as well. They've been worried about it for a while, right? Because their cooling systems don't really work very well if there's a certain percentage of salt in the water. So it's real money to a lot of the people out over there. And just as a quick side, we had a presentation on groundwater modeling as part of our Climb Bar Summit a few months ago. And so if you want to, I can put you in touch with the person who did that presentation. She is a groundwater modeler here at Delaware. And she's very active in linking up the multiple scale processes as well. So if you want to, I can put you in touch with some groundwater modelers here.
Would love that, particularly as we're thinking about the next phase of Icom and what we could really emphasize and what partners might be out there. We'd definitely love to make those contacts.
Will do.
I don't think I mentioned the PI for that program area's name when I went over the slide, but it's David Moulton from Los Angeles National Laboratory. So he's the person I would probably direct them to.
Any other questions? I see a couple.
Mike and
Hey, Mike.
Sure. So yeah, I have a couple questions or comments. One, I guess this kind of relates to the previous two, in terms of the ocean modeling side and high resolution. So when we saw your diagram of the different basins, there was also the full Mid-Atlantic coasts where the where the water meets the land. And I'm wondering, there's this heavy emphasis on the estuaries, right? The watersheds and estuaries. Is there also work going to be focused then on just the coasts that face the ocean and the modeling required there to resolve the coastline, the processes that occur there in the shelf up into the inlets that then may connect up to the tributaries upstream? From a U.S. Climb Bar standpoint, in part, while we do care very much about the large-scale atmospheric forcing and of coastal storms and the like, or storms that impinge on the coast, as well, the representation or simulating the ocean's role and the processes on the coast that also can impinge the coast is important. So I was wondering if that's in the sights of this project.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And you broke up there for about 5 seconds for me. I'm not sure if I had a bandwidth issue or something, but I think I caught most of that. And I think your questions center around the sort of need to resolve estuaries, but also the need to resolve the coastal shelf and coastal margins and sort of their near coastal ocean modeling. And both are of interest. We definitely started with a strong emphasis towards the estuaries, the river estuary dynamics, and sort of the mouths, and sort of treating the larger ocean as boundary conditions initially was kind of the starting point. And I think entering the project, our eyes might have been a little bigger than our stomach, and thinking that we could get down to sub-kilometer scale, sort of resolving a regionally refined model with sub-kilometer scale resolution in the Delaware and Chesapeake Bays with the full global ocean model coupled to it. And I think we've sort of backed off from that approach, realizing that it's probably makes more computational sense to use a dedicated regional model to resolve those really fine scale dynamics, something like a ROMS model, which already exists in those areas and have been calibrated and validated for years, and couple that to a more globally focused ocean model that can get down to a couple of kilometers of resolution might be a better approach. That's been the direction we've been headed over the last year or two. And so as part of that, we're trying to understand, okay, what are the regional to global then scale processes that are important to resolve? The E3SM model uses the MPAS-O framework to do ocean modeling. Perhaps you already knew that, but I think it gives us a lot of flexibility. And Darren Engwerda, who leads that program area within Icom, he has a lot of experience with building meshes and understands some of the challenges. For example, when you go to very high resolution near the coastline, that really affects what time step you can take in terms of the model. And so they're working on trying to develop different ways to do spatially explicit time stepping, maybe even on different time steps in different parts of the model in order to create a more computationally efficient way to get that high resolution where you need it. They also are very interested scientifically in that sort of how does the regional ocean then map out onto the broader sort of continental shelf scale dynamics that are occurring in the coastal ocean. I'm an atmospheric scientist by training, so you're quickly getting to the point where I'm out of my comfort zone and understanding the actual scientific details. So I definitely would, if you have more questions and have more interest in learning more about how we're simulating the coastal ocean, I'd probably put you in touch with Darren or with Rob Hetland, who are two sort of more card-carrying oceanographers on the project, and I think would be happy to chat more with you about where we're heading in that direction.
Aaron, go ahead.
Thanks for your talk. Just wondering a little bit, you mentioned intercomparisons, and I think that kind of gets at maybe some of these issues. Can you talk a little bit more about how you've, there are other Earth system models out there. How have you compared, or, just what are your initiatives for that? Because we are like the predictability panel, so kind of like doing sort of these overall comparisons is of interest.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that so far we've largely done internal intercomparisons where we're trying to compare and contrast the different models that we have. So in addition to the global Earth system model with regional refinement, we've got a regional model that we've constructed that uses like WRF as the atmospheric model, coupled with, I think they use ROMs in that simulation to do sort of simulations of individual hurricane events in the mid-Atlantic at pretty high resolution, and then look at, okay, well, if we run that same case in the Earth system model versus running it in this high resolution model, what do you gain? What do you lose? What processes do you really need to resolve? So we're largely using the intercomparison at this point to guide model development, especially the model development for E3SM. So understanding where and when is it important to have that higher spatiotemporal resolution or higher process resolution. So that's been one key focus of our activities. I think another question that we've asked as a group, and since we have like 6 or 7 different models as part of the project that can represent different aspects of flooding, is when does compound flooding really matter? And when does it matter that you do it in a coupled way versus doing it just simple additive, right? And I think we're coming to realize that in most cases, you tend to not get storm surge hitting at the exact same time. The extreme precipitation takes a while longer to get there. And so there's relatively few cases. Hurricane Harvey was a good example. There's a few major hurricanes where you really need to resolve both the stream-based flooding and the coastal flooding at the same time, as well as sort of overland flow. But in many cases, you can do those simulations independently and just add the results together and get the same answer. The nonlinear interactions between the components tend to not be as large as maybe we thought they were initially. So we're actually thinking of writing some kind of a review paper or some kind of a large paper that kind of tries to make that point. In some ways, that could simplify some of our modeling and analysis, if that is in fact true in most cases, because it lessens the need to do these as fully coupled processes, that a lot of the process could be simulated independently, and you'd get most of it by simply adding some of the results together. So again, that's not a fully vetted, published result yet, but that's kind of something that's emerging that we find very interesting. And we're really interested to know, okay, when and where is it really important, and when and where can you get away with something that's maybe a more computationally efficient solution?
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, Val.
Yeah, I have just a quick question. You have introduced 4 different programs. Yeah, it's pretty cool, lots of stuff. It will help understanding the coupling between different processes, different Earth systems. So my question is that, do you have some plan for some prediction work in the coming, probably the phase 2, or something you have already hiding in these different programs? I'm just curious about the prediction part.
So I think, living in a DOE lab, we're pretty sensitive to, and our program managers keep us pretty sensitive to agency boundaries. And so we definitely shy away from anything that looks like a forecast, right? Because that's NOAA's domain, and we don't want to, kind of get competitive there. That being said, I think predictability is an important interagency topic, and we are quite interested in the potential predictability of systems. I showed the one result of the intensification forecast, right? That's something that, I think there are some tools that DOE has developed. We've got a lot of, as I said before, a lot of expertise in data science and in sort of machine learning, et cetera, that we might be able to bring to bear on some of these challenges. And so I think we're quite interested in looking for opportunities to partner and look for ways to, where is it that we can improve predictability in coastal regions? And are some of those tools ones that can be adopted by the agencies that are more formally responsible for, you know, prediction and forecasting? Most of the DOE work tends to be in what I would say more projection mode. But there are examples also where we're trying to do hindcasting and trying to do attribution. You know, I showed the one result from Michael. So there are opportunities for us to do things that are associated with real world examples as opposed to hypothetical ones. But I think we're also looking to partner on that front.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess should thank the speaker one more time. We're gonna go into a closed panel session for the remainder of the hour. So
Thank you, Ian.